chains bit into Aurelia's wrists as the guards hauled her through the underground corridor. The stone walls wet with moisture, slick with centuries of decay. Behind her, the roar of the crowd still echoed through the passageways like the voice of a vengeful god. Hundreds of wolves who had just watched Elder Thaddeus Corvine announce her sentence without a single shred of evidence, without a single moment for her to defend herself. "You can't do this." Her voice cracked against the stone, swallowed by the tunnel's black throat. "I haven't done anything wrong." The guard on her left, a thick-necked enforcer named Gannon, tightened his grip on her arm until she gasped. His fingers dug into the bruises already forming their purple blooms from where they dragged her from the Great Hall. "Save your breath, Morgan. The Ancient doesn't care if you're innocent." Aurelia twisted against the chains, her bare feet slipping on the wet stone. The cold bit through the thin shift they'd left her in the only clothing deemed appropriate for a sacrifice. She could smell it now rising from the depths below. Something deep and primordial. A musk so ancient it made her wolf whimper inside her chest. Not from fear. From something she couldn't name. Something that made her blood hum in a way it never had before. 3 hours ago, she had been kneeling in the great hall of the Thornridge Pack, scrubbing the floor on her hands and knees, while the pack gathered for their monthly tribunal. The soap had been harsh, stripping the skin from her fingers, leaving them red and raw. She'd scrubbed that floor every day for 5 years, ever since her mother died, and left her with nothing but a name and a crescent-shaped birthmark behind her left ear that she kept hidden beneath her hair. 3 hours ago, she had been nobody. An Omega with no rank, no family, no wolf that would shift. Assigned to the kitchens and the cleaning rotation since the day her mother's body was found at the base of the eastern cliff, broken on the rocks below. An accident, they'd said. A tragic slip on a rainy night. Aurelia had never believed it. Then Vivian Ashford had pointed a manicured finger directly at her. "She's the one. She's been stealing from the pack vault. I saw her leaving the treasury wing last night with something hidden under her coat." Aurelia had looked up from her knees soap, still dripping from her fingers, and stared at the beta female with her mouth open. Vivian Ashford, golden-haired, sharp-jawed, draped in silk the color of blood. She stood on the raised platform beside Elder Corvine with a look of practiced horror on her face, as though she had rehearsed it in a mirror. As though she had prepared for this moment with the same care a hunter prepares a trap. "What?" Aurelia's voice had been small in the vastness of the hall. "I wasn't anywhere near the treasury wing. I was in the laundry until midnight. You can check the logs." "Silence, Omega!" Elder Corvine's voice had cracked like a whip across the hall. He was old, impossibly old, with a face like crumpled parchment and eyes that had stopped seeing anything but his own authority decades ago. He didn't look at Aurelia. He looked at Vivian, and whatever passed between them in that glance was enough to seal Aurelia's fate before a single word of defense could be spoken. "The punishment for theft from the pack is well established," Corvine had said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "But given the severity, and given that the item stolen was the Moonstone Pendant, a sacred relic of our founding bloodline, the council has elected for an older punishment." A murmur had rippled through the crowd. Aurelia's stomach had dropped through the floor. "She will be offered to the Ancient." The hall had erupted. Some wolves howled in approval, their voices rising in a chorus of bloodlust. Others turned away, unable to watch. A few of the younger Omega's girls, Aurelia had shared meals with braided hair, with comforted through nightmares, pressed their hands over their mouths and wept. No one had been offered to the Ancient in over 43 years. The last sacrifice had been a rogue wolf caught trying to assassinate the Alpha. They dragged him into the tunnels beneath the mountain, chained him to the altar in the deepest chamber, and left him there. When scouts finally entered the chamber 3 days later, they found nothing but the chains. Not a bone, not a shred of cloth, just claw marks gouged so deep into the stone altar that they looked like scripture written in violence. The ancient Lycan was not a wolf. It was something older, something that existed before packs, before hierarchy, before the moon herself had chosen her children. It lived in the belly of the mountain, sleeping for decades at a time, and when it woke, it fed. The Thornridge Pack had built their territory above its lair. Not out of bravery, but out of bargain. They kept the mountain. They offered blood when the earth trembled and the ancients stirred. And now they were offering Aurelia. The tunnel opened into a cavern so vast that the torchlight couldn't find the ceiling. The air was thick and warm, heavy with the scent of something animal and electric. Like the air before a lightning strike mixed with pine and iron, and something sweet that made Aurelia's lungs ache. Her wolf, the wolf that had never once shifted, that had earned her the label of defective, broken, unworthy, surged against her ribs with a force that nearly brought her to her knees. Not in fear, in recognition. The guards dragged her to the center of the cavern, where a stone altar rose from the floor like a fractured tooth. The surface was scarred with those same claw marks, deep gouges that spoke of rage and hunger, and something that might have been despair. The chains were bolted to iron rings embedded in the rock, ancient and rust-stained. They locked her wrists above her head with hands that trembled despite their rough efficiency. Gannon wouldn't meet her eyes. "For what it's worth," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "I don't think you stole anything." "Then why are you chaining me to an altar?" He didn't answer. He stepped back and the guards retreated toward the tunnel entrance, their torchlights shrinking until Aurelia was alone in the dark. Silence, complete and crushing. She could hear her own heartbeat, too fast, too loud. She could hear the drip of water somewhere far away echoing through chambers she couldn't see. She could hear the mountain breathing a deep inhale and exhale that moved through the stone beneath her feet. And then she heard something else, a sound so low it was less a noise than a vibration. A resonance that moved through the stone beneath her feet and climbed up through her bones and settled in her chest like a second heartbeat. Footsteps, not the footsteps of a wolf or a man, something heavier. Something that moved with the deliberate patience of a creature that had never once needed to hurry because nothing in this world or any other had ever been a threat to it. The darkness shifted. Aurelia's eyes had adjusted enough to see shapes in the black. The jagged walls, the dripping stalactites. And now she saw something moving among them, a shape so large it seemed to reorganize the shadows around itself. Eyes opened in the dark. 2 points of light that burned with an intelligence so ancient and so focused that Aurelia forgot how to breathe. The ancient lichen emerged from the darkness like a living myth. It stood upright on 2 legs 8 feet tall, at least with a body that was neither fully wolf nor fully human, but something in between. Something that predated the distinction. Its fur was black as deep water, streaked with silver at the muzzle and down the ridge of its spine. Its claws were the length of hunting knives. Its chest was broad as a door, scarred with marks from battles fought before history learned to write. It approached the altar with slow measured steps, and with each step the ground trembled faintly as though the mountain itself was kneeling. Aurelia pressed her back against the stone. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts. Every instinct she had screamed at her to run, to fight, to do anything but stand here in chains and wait to be devoured. But her wolf did something it had never done before. It sang. Not a howl, not a whimper. A sound that rose from somewhere so deep inside her that it bypassed her throat entirely and resonated outward through her skin, through the air, through the stone. A sound that was older than language, older than music, older than the moon. The ancient lichen stopped. Its massive head tilted. Those burning eyes narrowed and a sound rumbled from its chest. Not a growl, but something closer to a question. It lowered its enormous muzzle toward her nostrils, flaring, and inhaled. Aurelia closed her eyes and waited for teeth. Instead, something warm and impossibly gentle pressed against the crescent-shaped birthmark behind her left ear. The ancient's nose. It was scenting her not the way a predator scents prey, but the way a wolf scents something it has been searching for across an impossible distance of time. A sound tore from the creature's throat. It was not a roar. It was not a howl. It was a word. Queen. Aurelia's eyes flew open. The ancient lichen had pulled back just enough that she could see its face if a face like that could be read. And what she saw in those eyes was not hunger. It was devotion. It was grief. It was the look of someone who had waited so long for something that they had forgotten they were waiting until the moment it finally arrived. The chains around her wrists shattered. Not unlocked, shattered. The iron crumbled like dried clay, and the bolts in the stone cracked and fell away, as though the mountain itself had decided she should be free. Aurelia stumbled forward, her wrists raw and bleeding, and the ancient caught her. One massive clawed hand cupped beneath her elbow with a gentleness that should have been impossible for something that size, that power, that age. And then it did something that changed everything. The ancient lichen began to shift. The bones cracked and reformed. The fur receded. The massive frame compressed and reshaped itself with a sound like a thunderstorm collapsing into a single point. And where the creature had stood, a man now knelt on the stone floor. He was enormous, even in human form. Well over 6 feet, with shoulders that strained against skin marked with the same silver streaks. His hair was black, long enough to brush his jaw, threaded with silver at the temples. His face was hard-cut and beautiful in the way that ancient things are beautiful. Not pretty, not polished, but carved by time into something elemental. His eyes were still burning, still looking at her as though she were the answer to a prayer, spoken in a language the world had forgotten. You carry the mark of the first Luna. His voice was deep, raw, unused, like a bell that had not been rung in decades, vibrating with the effort of speech. I don't understand. Aurelia's voice shook. Who are you? I am Darius. I was the first Alpha. He reached out slowly as though afraid she might disappear if he moved too quickly. His fingers trembled as they traced the air near her face, not quite touching. And you, Aurelia, are the bloodline I have spent 1,000 years waiting to find. Aurelia shook her head, backing away until her shoulders hit the altar. This was impossible. The ancient lichen was supposed to be a mindless beast, a weapon the pack kept caged beneath the mountain. Not a man, not an Alpha, not someone who knew her name. How do you know my name? Because your mother whispered it to me when she brought you here as an infant and begged me to protect your bloodline. His voice broke on the word mother, and something in Aurelia's chest cracked open. She told me you would come back to me. She told me the pack would send you when they feared you most. The ground shifted beneath Aurelia's understanding. Her mother, quiet, broken, unremarkable Alara, who had worked in the Thornridge kitchens until the day she died. who had fallen from a cliff in the rain, her body shattered on the rocks below. Her mother had known about the ancient, had spoken to him, had trusted him with Aurelia's life. My mother never told me any of this. She couldn't. She knew they were watching. Darius's hand moved to the crescent mark behind her ear, and where his fingertip touched her skin, light bloomed. Soft silver, warm as sunlight, filtered through water. The mark behind your ear. It is the crest of the first Luna, the original mate bond, the bloodline that connects all wolves to the moon. Your mother carried it, her mother before her, and you. The light grew brighter, spreading from the point of contact, and Aurelia gasped as something inside her cracked open like an egg. Her wolf erupted. Not gently, not gradually. It tore through her with a force that dropped her to her knees, and the shift that had never come, that had labeled her broken and defective, and less than ripped through her body like a revelation. Her bones sang. Her skin rippled. And when it was done, she stood on 4 paws in the cavern's darkness, and her fur was white. Pure, luminous white, like moonlight given form. Darius stared at her, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the first alpha's eyes filled with tears. "There you are," he whispered. "I've waited so long." He shifted beside her, not into the massive ancient form, but into a wolf. Black as night, enormous, scarred, but moving with a grace that spoke of power held in perfect restraint. He pressed his muzzle to hers, and the bond that had waited a millennium to complete itself snapped into place with a force that shook the mountain above them. Somewhere in the great hall of the Thornridge Pack, the chandelier swung. Cracks split the stone floor. Wolves stumbled and grabbed at each other as the earth beneath their feet groaned and shifted. And Elder Corvine gripped the edge of his seat with white-knuckled hands, his face draining of color. "What is this?" His voice was barely a whisper. "What's happening?" Vivian Ashford stood frozen at the edge of the platform, her practiced composure cracking. She knew, she could feel it in her bones in the way every wolf in the hall could feel it. The bond, ancient and absolute, reverberating through the bloodline connection that tied every living wolf to the first alpha. He was awake, and he was not alone. But then Darius's knees buckled. The massive black wolf staggered, and before Aurelia could react, he collapsed. The shift reversed itself violently, fur receding, bones cracking back into human form, and the man who had stood so powerfully just moments before now lay trembling on the stone floor. His skin was burning. Even from a foot away, Aurelia could feel the heat radiating from him like a forge. She shifted back to human form on instinct, her new white wolf receding as quickly as it had emerged, and she dropped to her knees beside him. Darius, her hands hovered over him, afraid to touch, afraid not to. "What's wrong? What's happening?" His eyes rolled back, showing white. His body convulsed, muscles seizing, and a sound tore from his throat that was neither human nor wolf, but something caught between. His temperature spiked. She could see the flush spreading across his skin, could see the sweat beating on his forehead, despite the cavern's chill. "No." The word came out as a desperate whisper. "No, you can't. You just found me." But Darius didn't respond. His eyes had closed and his breathing had gone shallow and rapid. The fever was consuming him from the inside out, and Aurelia understood with sudden terrible clarity what was happening. 1,000 years of dormancy, 1,000 years of sleep. His body was rejecting the awakening. The bond had forced him conscious, had pulled him from whatever twilight state he'd existed in for a millennium, but the price was this. His system couldn't handle the transition, couldn't handle being awake after so long in the dark. He was dying. And Aurelia, who had been chained to an altar as a sacrifice just minutes before, who had shifted for the first time in her life, who had discovered she was the heir to a bloodline so ancient the pack had tried to erase it, realized something with absolute certainty. She had not been brought here to die. She had been brought here to save him. Aurelia's hands shook as she pressed them against Darius's forehead. The heat was overwhelming, like touching sun-baked stone in the height of summer. 109 degrees, maybe higher. High enough to kill a human. High enough to damage a wolf's brain beyond repair. "Stay with me." Her voice cracked in the empty cavern. "Darius, please, stay with me." His only response was another convulsion, his back arching off the stone floor, muscles locked in a rigid spasm that looked like it might snap his spine. When it passed, he went limp, his breathing even more shallow than before. Aurelia looked around the cavern with desperate eyes. The guards were long gone. The torches they'd left were guttering in their sconces, throwing wild shadows across the stone walls. There was nothing here. No supplies, no water, no help. Just her and a dying alpha, in a darkness so complete it felt like being buried alive. But she had not survived 5 years as an Omega in the Thornridge Pack by giving up when things looked impossible. She closed her eyes and forced herself to think, to remember. 5 years in the kitchens. 5 years of preparing meals, of learning which herbs went into, which dishes, of sneaking scraps of old medical texts from the healer's quarters when no one was looking. 5 years of treating her own injuries because no one else would, of learning to survive on scraps in silence. Fever. She needed to bring down the fever. Willow bark. The thought came sharp and clear. Willow bark reduced fever, reduced inflammation. Aurelia opened her eyes and looked deeper. Aurelia opened her eyes and looked deeper into the darkness. The cavern didn't end at the altar. She could hear water moving somewhere in the black, a sound like a distant stream. And where there was water, there might be plants. The mountain had been Darius's home for 1,000 years. Surely he hadn't survived on stone alone. She stood her legs unstawed and looked down at Darius's unconscious form. She couldn't leave him, but she couldn't save him without supplies either. "I'll be right back," she whispered, knowing he couldn't hear her. "I promise." She grabbed one of the guttering torches from its sconce and moved deeper into the cavern. The tunnel twisted downward, the walls pressing close enough that she had to turn sideways in places. The sound of water grew louder, and the air grew damper, carrying scents that made her omega instincts sharpen. Moss, lichen, and something else. Something green and growing. The tunnel opened into a smaller chamber, and Aurelia's breath caught. A spring, crystal clear water bubbled up from a crack in the stone floor, forming a pool no wider than she was tall, before spilling over the edge and disappearing into another tunnel. And around the pool's edge, impossibly, were plants. Not many. Not the lush growth of a forest, but enough. Pale cave flowers that had never seen the sun, moss thick as carpet, and there growing from a crack in the wall where centuries of water had deposited soil a small twisted tree. Aurelia moved closer, her torch held high. The bark was pale, almost white, with the distinctive diamond-shaped patterns she'd memorized from the healer's texts. Willow. Her hands were shaking as she used a sharp stone to cut strips of bark from the tree. Not too much. Just enough. The tree had survived here in the dark for who knew how long, and she wouldn't kill it for one man's fever, even if that man was the first alpha. She filled her cupped hands with water from the spring, icy cold and pure, and hurried back to where Darius lay. He looked worse. The flush had spread across his entire body, and his breathing had taken on a wet, labored quality that terrified her. She'd heard that sound before in the kitchens, when one of the older wolves had contracted pneumonia. He died 3 days later. Aurelia knelt beside Darius and forced herself to think like the healer she'd never been allowed to become. Willow bark needed to be boiled to release its medicine, but she had no pot, no fire that wouldn't consume her precious torch. She looked at the bark in her hand, then at Darius's cracked, dry lips. She put a strip of bark in her own mouth and chewed. It was bitter astringent, making her mouth pucker and her eyes water. But she chewed until it was pulp, until she could feel the oils releasing on her tongue, and then she leaned over Darius and pressed her mouth to his. She pushed the pulp past his lips with her tongue, felt him swallow reflexively even in his unconscious state. She did it again and again. Strip after strip of willow bark chewed and transferred until her mouth was numb from the bitterness and her jaw ached. Then she cupped water in her hands and dribbled it between his lips, careful not to choke him, giving him just enough to wash down the medicine. The fever didn't break, not immediately, but his breathing seemed to ease slightly, the wet rattle fading to something more like sleep. Aurelia sat back on her heels exhausted and realized she was still wearing nothing but the thin shift they'd dressed her in for the sacrifice. The cavern was warm near the altar, heated by some deep geothermal source, but here the air was cool enough to raise goosebumps on her arms. Darius needed warmth, needed his body temperature regulated while the fever fought itself out, and there was only one source of heat available: her. Aurelia hesitated for just a moment, omega instincts warring with the practical necessity of what she was about to do. Then she lay down beside Darius on the stone floor and pressed her body against his. The heat of him was shocking even through the thin fabric of her shift, like lying next to a bonfire. But she wrapped her arms around him anyway, pressed her chest against his back, tangled her legs with his, and held on. "You're going to live," she whispered into his hair. "Do you hear me? You're going to live." The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and desperate vigilance. Aurelia drifted in and out of sleep, jolting awake every time Darius's breathing changed, every time his body tensed with another convulsion. She made 3 more trips to the spring gathering, more willow bark filling her mouth with icy water to dribble between his lips. She found yarrow growing near a crack that led to the surface, its distinctive fern-like leaves unmistakable, even in the torchlight. Yarrow for infection, for inflammation. She chewed it, like the willow bark, the taste even more bitter, and fed it to him the same way. She found her mind wandering as she worked at retreating into memory to escape the fear of watching him die. She remembered her mother's hands scarred from years of kitchen work braiding her hair before bed. Remembered her mother's voice soft and sad, singing lullabies in a language Aurelia had never learned. Remembered the last time she'd seen her mother alive, standing at the edge of the eastern cliff staring out at the valley below, with an expression Aurelia had been too young to interpret. Had she known? Had Alara Morgan known she was going to die that night? "She told me you would come back to me," Darius had said. "She told me the pack would send you when they feared you most." Feared, not hated, not wanted to punish. Feared. Why would the pack fear an Omega who couldn't shift, an Omega assigned to scrub floors and wash dishes? Unless they knew, unless they had always known what she carried in her blood. The crescent mark behind her ear burned suddenly at a phantom heat that had nothing to do with Darius's fever. Aurelia reached up and touched it, felt the raised skin, the shape that had been there since birth. A shape her mother had always insisted she keep hidden, had always covered with carefully arranged hair. Never let them see it, Allura had told her over and over. Never let them know. But know what Aurelia looked down at Darius's face peaceful now, in unconsciousness despite the fever ravaging his body. He had known her name, had known her mother, had been waiting for her. How long had this been planned? How many years had her mother known that Aurelia would end up here in the dark with the first alpha? And if Alara had known if she had planned for this, then her death was no accident. The certainty settled into Aurelia's bones like ice water. Her mother had been murdered, pushed from that cliff by someone who knew what she was protecting, who she was protecting. Someone who wanted the First Luna bloodline to end. Someone like Elder Corvine. The rage that filled her then was hot and pure and more powerful than any emotion she'd ever experienced. It burned through the exhaustion, through the fear, through 5 years of learned submission and forced silence. They had killed her mother. They had tried to kill her. And when that failed, when the Ancient recognized her, instead of devouring her, they would try again. But she was not the broken Omega they thought she was. Not anymore. She had shifted. Had felt her wolf powerful and pure white as moonlight. Had felt the bonds snap into place with Darius, ancient and unbreakable. She was First Luna bloodline. And that meant something. Meant power she was only beginning to understand. Power she would learn to use. You're going to teach me, she whispered to Darius's unconscious form. When you wake up, you're going to teach me everything. And then we're going to make them pay for what they did. On the second day, Darius opened his eyes. It was just for a moment, just a brief flutter of awareness before they closed again. But Aurelia saw it, saw the recognition there, the consciousness. Darius, she leaned over him, her hand on his chest, feeling the too rapid beat of his heart. Can you hear me? His lips moved. No sound came out, but she could read the shape of the word. Luna. I'm here. Her throat tightened. I'm right here. You're going to be okay. His hand moved trembling and found hers. His fingers were burning hot, but his grip was weak as a child's. He held on for a moment, just long enough for Aurelia to feel the connection between them pulse like a living thing, and then his eyes closed again, and he was gone back into the fever. But it was enough. It was progress. Aurelia redoubled her efforts. She made a paste of yarrow and willow bark mixed with water from the spring and rubbed it into the pulse points at his wrists and throat. She tore strips from her already tattered shift and soaked them in cold water, laying them across his forehead, his chest, anywhere she could reach. She talked to him, narrating everything she was doing, filling the silence with her voice, because she couldn't bear the thought of him being alone in whatever dark place the fever had taken him. I'm getting more water now. The spring is beautiful. Did you know that? There's a willow tree growing there, in the dark. I don't know how it survives without sunlight, but it does. Maybe you brought the seeds down here. Maybe you planted it years ago knowing you might need it someday. She told him about the kitchens, about learning to identify herbs by taste and smell, about stealing medical texts and reading them by candlelight after everyone else had gone to bed, about the scars on her hands from the harsh soap, the burns on her arms from the cooking fires. I always wondered why I bothered learning all of it, she said, wiping his face with a cool cloth. Why I worked so hard to understand things I'd never be allowed to use. Omegas aren't healers. We're not anything important. But maybe this is why. Maybe I was supposed to learn it all so I could save you. On the third day, his fever broke. Aurelia woke from a fitful sleep pressed against his back to find his skin merely warm instead of burning. His breathing had deepened, lengthened, taken on the regular rhythm of genuine rest instead of fever-induced unconsciousness. She sat up, hardly daring to believe it, and pressed her hand to his forehead. Warm, but not dangerously so. The fever had released its grip. Thank the moon, she whispered, and realized she was crying. Thank the moon. She let him sleep. He needed to let his body recover from the trauma of the last 3 days. She used the time to explore more of the cavern system, following tunnels that branched off from the main chamber. She found what must have been Darius's living space, if 1,000 years of dormancy could be called living. A smaller chamber with a raised stone platform covered in furs, so old they crumbled at her touch. Stone shelves carved into the walls holding objects she couldn't identify in the dim torchlight. A chest made of wood that shouldn't have survived a millennium, but somehow had bound with iron and sealed with wax. Aurelia hesitated, then opened it. Inside were clothes, simple leather breeches, and tunics preserved by the dry air of the deep cavern. She pulled out a tunic, held it up, and realized it would be enormous on her, but might fit Darius. Beneath the clothes were other things. A knife with a handle made of bone, a pendant on a silver chain, the metal tarnished black with age. And at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, a book. Aurelia's hands shook as she unwrapped it. The cover was leather, unmarked, and when she opened it, she found pages of text written in a language she didn't recognize. But there were drawings, too. Wolves, the moon, and a woman with a crescent mark behind her ear rendered in faded ink. The First Luna. Aurelia traced the drawing with one finger, feeling something resonate in her chest. This was her bloodline, her heritage. The thing her mother had died to protect. She closed the book carefully and rewrapped it, then gathered up the tunic and returned to where Darius still slept. He looked better. The worst of the sickness had passed, leaving him merely exhausted instead of dying. She sat beside him, the leather tunic folded in her lap, and waited. When his eyes finally opened, truly opened, aware and focused, it was late on the third day. He stared at the cavern's ceiling for a long moment, though reorienting himself to consciousness. Then his gaze slid sideways and found her. "You stayed." His voice was rough, but barely more than a whisper, but it was steady. "Sane. Where else would I go?" Aurelia managed a weak smile. "I'm the sacrifice, remember, chained to the altar for the monster in the dark." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "And how did that work out for you?" "The monster turned out to be the first alpha who's been waiting 1,000 years for my bloodline to find him." She reached out and brushed hair back from his forehead, the gesture startlingly intimate, but feeling somehow natural. "And then he collapsed, and I've spent the last 3 days keeping him alive with willow bark and yarrow and prayer." Darius's expression shifted into something she couldn't read. Wonder, maybe, or disbelief. "You saved me. You freed me from the chains. I returned the favor." "Aurelia." He tried to sit up, managed to get his shoulders off the ground before his strength gave out. She caught him, helped him ease back down. "You don't understand. After the bond formed, after 1,000 years dormant, my body should have shut down completely. The fever should have killed me. The fact that I'm alive, that I'm conscious, is because of you. And the willow bark helped," she said, deflecting the weight of his gratitude, because she didn't know how to carry it. "The willow bark kept me from burning up in the first few hours. But you kept me alive for 3 days. You found medicine in the dark. You stayed when you could have run." His hand found hers, his grip stronger now than it had been before. "No one has cared whether I lived or died in 1,000 years, Aurelia. No one has fought for me. No one has chosen me." "Well," her throat was tight, "I'm choosing you now." They stayed like that for a moment, hands clasped, the bond between them, humming with something that felt like gratitude and recognition and the first fragile threads of trust. Then Darius spoke again, his voice taking on a different quality. Harder. Focused. "Tell me what happened. Tell me how they sent you to me." So she did. She told him about Vivian's accusation, about the moonstone pendant she'd never seen, let alone stolen. About Elder Corvine's immediate judgment, the lack of any investigation, the speed with which they'd condemned her. "They wanted me gone," she said, "but not just banished, dead. They wanted to make sure I couldn't come back. Because they knew." Darius's eyes had gone cold, darkening. "Corvine has been Alpha of Thornridge for how long? 40 years, maybe more. He was already old when I was born. Long enough to remember the stories. Long enough to know that the first Luna bloodline hadn't died out, just gone into hiding." Darius pushed himself up to sitting this time, and though his arms shook with the effort, he managed it. "Your mother came to me 23 years ago. She was terrified. Said the council had discovered what she was, that they were planning to eliminate her and her child before the bloodline could awaken." Aurelia's breath caught. She knew she was going to die. She knew they would try. "I told her to run, to take you far from Thornridge and never come back." But she refused. Darius's expression was distant remembering. "She said running would only delay the inevitable, that they would hunt her down eventually. So she made a different choice. She hid you in plain sight, kept you as an Omega, powerless, invisible. Let them think your wolf was broken, that the bloodline had diluted to nothing. And came back to you," Aurelia whispered, "to make sure you would protect me when the time came. She laid you on my chest while I slept and asked me to wait, to watch, to be ready for the day they would send you to die, because she knew that day would come." His hand tightened on hers. "She told me you would be the one to wake me, that the bond would recognize you even if 1,000 years had passed." The pieces were falling into place, a picture of sacrifice and long planning and a mother's desperate love. "They killed her 5 years ago," Aurelia said, "pushed her from a cliff and called it an accident. Because she knew too much. Because she was protecting you." Darius's voice had gone deadly quiet. "And now they've tried to finish what they started. To eliminate you before you could awaken. Before you could find me. But they failed." Aurelia met his eyes, saw her own rage reflected there. "I shifted, the bond completed. I'm First Luna bloodline, and I'm not hiding anymore." "No." A fierce pride entered Darius's expression. "You're not. And they will answer for what they've done. Every alpha on that council. Every wolf who stood by and watched them send you to die. They will answer to us both." "I want them to know," Aurelia said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "I want them to see what they tried to destroy. I want Elder Corvine to look me in the eyes and know he failed." Darius smiled, then sharp and predatory. "Then we'll make sure he does. But first I need to teach you what you are. What we are together." He released her hand and made as if to stand, but his legs buckled immediately. Aurelia caught him, her arms around his waist, and felt the warmth of his skin through the thin fabric of her shift. "You're still weak. You need more time to recover." I've been asleep for 1,000 years. I've had enough time. But he let her help him sit back down, and she could see the frustration in his eyes at his body's limitations. 3 more days, she said firmly. You rest for 3 more days. Eat, drink, get your strength back, and then we'll talk about teaching me. 3 days. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You saved my life, Aurelia Morgan. I spent 1,000 years waiting for First Luna bloodline to return. I was prepared to wait 1,000 more, if that's what it took. But I wasn't prepared for you to be you. What do you mean? I expected a Luna, a queen, someone powerful and commanding who would wake me and claim her birthright. His hand came up to cup her face thumb, brushing her cheekbone. I didn't expect an Omega who scrubs floors, who knows how to find medicine in the dark, who would stay beside a dying stranger for 3 days because it was the right thing to do. Aurelia felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with fever. I'm not special. You're my equal. Darius's voice was firm, absolute. Not my subject, not my servant, not my possession, my equal. And when we leave this mountain, when we face the wolves who tried to destroy you, we face them together, as partners. The words settled into her chest like a promise. Partners, not master and Omega, not Alpha and Luna in the traditional sense of dominance and submission. Partners. I've never had a partner before, she admitted quietly. Neither have I, not in 1,000 years. He smiled, and it transformed his face from harsh to something approaching gentle. I suppose we'll have to figure it out together. Aurelia smiled back, and for the first time since the guards had dragged her into the tunnels, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. On the 4th day, Darius could stand. It wasn't graceful. His legs shook like a newborn colt's, and he had to brace himself against the cavern wall to keep from falling. But he was upright, breathing steadily, the fever nothing more than a bad memory, written in the hollows beneath his eyes. Aurelia handed him the leather tunic she'd found in his chamber. You should wear something, unless you prefer walking around naked. A hint of amusement crossed his face as he took the garment. After 1,000 years, dormant modesty seems like a strange thing to worry about. But he pulled the tunic over his head anyway, the leather settling across his shoulders like it had been made for him. Which she supposed it had been. 1,000 years ago when the world was younger and he had walked it as the first alpha. She tried not to stare at the way the leather emphasized the breadth of his chest, the strength still evident in his frame despite the recent illness. Tried not to notice how his hands, when he reached up to tie the laces at the collar, were steady now. Strong. He caught her looking and raised an eyebrow. See something interesting? I'm just making sure you're actually recovering. She turned away, busying herself with the small pile of supplies she'd gathered. Strips of willow bark, dried yarrow. The water skin she'd fashioned from a piece of leather she'd found in his chamber, sealed with tree sap. You collapsed pretty dramatically. Forgive me for wanting to make sure you can actually walk before we start whatever training you think I need. The training you definitely need, he corrected, moving to stand beside her. Closer than necessary. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, no longer the dangerous heat of fever, but the natural warmth of a body recovered and strong. You shifted once. Barely. You have no control over it yet. And the bloodline power that lets you feel the bond that's still mostly dormant. I can feel it sometimes. Aurelia pressed a hand to her chest, to the place where the bond hummed like a second heartbeat. Like something waiting under my skin. Watching. Listening. That's exactly what it is. The first Luna power isn't just physical strength. It's connection. The ability to feel every wolf in your pack, to know their hearts, to see truth through lies. And Darius's voice had taken on a teaching quality, patient and focused. But more than that, it's memory. The bloodline carries the history of our people. Every Luna before you left an imprint, a piece of themselves in the bond that connects us all to the moon. That's why I could shift when you touched the mark. Aurelia reached up to trace the crescent behind her ear. It wasn't just my wolf. It was all of them. All the Lunas before me. Yes. Darius's hand covered hers, gently pulling it away from the mark. And that's where we'll start your training. But not here, not at the altar where they chained you. His expression darkened. You should never have to see those chains again. He led her deeper into the cavern system, down tunnels she hadn't explored during her desperate search for medicine. The passages twisted and narrowed, forcing them to walk single file, in places Darius's broad shoulders nearly brushing the stone walls on either side. How long have you lived down here? Aurelia asked, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. I didn't live here, not at first. Darius's voice drifted back to her. I ruled from a great hall carved into the mountain's peak. Had a pack of 500 wolves, strong and loyal. We built something beautiful up there. Something that lasted 300 years before it all fell apart. What happened? He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then betrayal. The council I trusted, the alphas I'd raised and trained and treated as brothers, decided they wanted power I wouldn't share. They poisoned my Luna, my mate, and when she died, when the bond severed, something in me broke. Aurelia's throat tightened. She'd felt the bond's power, had experienced just a fraction of what it meant to be connected to another soul that deeply. The thought of it being ripped away, of losing that connection to death and murder, made her chest ache. I killed them, Darius continued, his voice flat, empty. All 6 of the council members who'd conspired against her. Tore them apart with my bare hands and left their bodies for the crows. And then I came down here into the mountain's belly and told the pack I would sleep. That I would wait for First Luna bloodline to return, because without my mate, without that bond, I had no reason to stay awake. But you didn't actually sleep. No, I was dormant but aware, caught between waking and dreaming for 1,000 years. Feeling the pack above me forget what I'd been. Feeling them turn the memory of me into a monster story to frighten children. He paused, glancing back at her. Until your mother came. Until she laid you on my chest and I felt the bloodline mark pulse with life for the first time in a millennium. That's when I knew. That's when I started truly waiting instead of just existing. The tunnel opened into a chamber unlike anything Aurelia had seen before. It was vast, easily 3 times the size of the great hall above. But where the hall was lit by torches and candles, this chamber glowed with its own light. The walls were covered in a substance that looked like crystal pale blue and faintly luminescent, casting everything in a soft, ethereal glow. And in the center of the chamber stood a pool of water so still it looked like glass, reflecting the crystal ceiling above in a perfect mirror image. What is this place? Aurelia breathed, stepping into the chamber with the reverence it demanded. The heart of the mountain. Darius moved to the pool's edge, his reflection sharp and clear on the water's surface. Where the moon's power runs deepest. Where the bond between Alpha and Luna was first formed before pacts, before hierarchy, before we forgot what we were meant to be. Aurelia joined him at the pool's edge, staring down at her own reflection. She looked wild. Her hair hung in tangled waves past her shoulders, bits of dirt and stone dust caught in the strands. Her shift was torn and stained barely decent. Her face was smudged with grime, and there were dark circles under her eyes from 3 days of sleeping and snatches on cold stone. But her eyes were different. They'd always been gray pale and unremarkable, the kind of eyes that let her fade into the background. Now they held flecks of silver, catching the crystal light and throwing it back with an intensity that startled her. You see it? Darius said, watching her study her reflection. The change, the awakening. I look like someone else. You look like yourself. For the first time in your life, you look like who you were always meant to be. He knelt beside the pool, his hand hovering over the water's surface without touching it. This pool holds memory. Every Alpha and Luna who ever stood here left a piece of themselves in the water. Their joys, their sorrows, their truth. If you're strong enough, if you're ready, you can see them. Help Sham, touch the water, open yourself to the bond, and let the bloodline show you what it knows. He looked up at her, his eyes serious. But I'm warning you, Aurelia, what you see might hurt. Memory doesn't discriminate between comfort and pain. It shows you everything. Aurelia thought about her mother, about the questions that had haunted her for 5 years, about the feeling that her whole life had been built on secrets and lies, and she'd been too powerless to uncover the truth. She knelt beside Darius and plunged her hand into the water. The world dissolved. She was standing in the heart of the mountain, but it was different. The crystal walls glowed brighter, and the pool was surrounded by wolves. Dozens of them. Hundreds. All watching as a woman with dark hair and a crescent mark behind her ear stepped into the water. Her hand clasped in the hand of a man who looked like Darius, but younger, less scarred, his eyes full of hope instead of ancient grief. I bind my life to yours, the man said, his voice echoing through the chamber. My strength to your wisdom, my power to your grace. I bind my soul to yours, the woman replied, my heart to your protection, my purpose to your reign. The bond snapped into place between them, visible as a thread of silver light that connected their chests, and every wolf in the chamber howled. Not in dominance or submission, but in recognition, in celebration. This was the first Alpha and the first Luna. This was the beginning. The vision shifted. Now she saw the woman alone, heavily pregnant, her hand on her swollen belly as she stood at the mountain's peak and looked out over a valley filled with pack houses and training grounds and gardens. She was smiling content, her other hand resting on the shoulder of a young girl no more than 5 years old. Someday, the first Luna said to the child, you'll stand here and watch over the pack as I do. You'll carry the mark and the bond and the responsibility of leading our people toward something better than strength alone. The little girl looked up at her mother with eyes that held flecks of silver. What if I'm not strong enough? Strength isn't just physical, little moon. Remember that. The strongest wolves aren't always the biggest or the fastest. Sometimes they're the ones who know how to heal instead of harm, how to build instead of destroy. The vision shifted again, faster now. Images bleeding into each other like watercolors in rain. The first Luna lying in bed, her face gray with poison, her mate kneeling beside her with tears streaming down his face. Don't leave me. Please, I can't do this without you. You can, she whispered, her hand trembling as it reached for his face. You're stronger than you know, but promise me, when you find another Luna, when the bloodline returns, don't let grief make you cruel. Don't let my death poison what we built together. But he had. Aurelia could feel it now, the rage and grief that had consumed Darius after his mate died. Could feel how he'd torn the council apart, how he'd descended into the mountain more monster than man, how he'd chosen dormancy over facing a world without her. The vision shifted forward in time. Years, decades, centuries. She saw the pack above forgetting the first alpha's name. Saw them building a new hierarchy based on strength and dominance instead of partnership. Saw omegas being pushed to the bottom, their gifts dismissed, their voices silenced. Saw the crescent mark appearing generation after generation, always on women, always hidden, always protected by mothers, who knew what it meant even as the pack forgot. Saw Elder Corvine 40 years younger, but with the same cold eyes standing over a ledger with another alpha whose face she didn't recognize. The land sales will make us wealthy beyond measure. 400 acres of sacred land sold to the lumber company over 15 years. 2.3 million in profit, but we must be careful. If anyone discovers what we're doing, no one will discover it, the other alpha said. Who would believe in Omega even if they did? We've made sure of that. The vision shifted again, and Aurelia's breath caught. Her mother, young, barely 20, holding a newborn baby wrapped in soft cloth. She was standing at the entrance to these very tunnels, tears streaming down her face as she looked into the darkness. I know you're down there, Alara whispered. I know you're listening. Please, please protect her. They're going to kill her. They're going to kill us both if they find out what she is. But if I hide her, if I make them think she's broken, maybe she'll survive long enough to reach you. Alara descended into the tunnels, the baby quiet in her arms, and made her way to the chamber where Darius lay dormant on his stone platform. She laid the infant on his chest, and even in sleep, even after centuries of darkness, his hand moved, curved protectively over the baby's back. Her name is Aurelia, Alara said, her voice breaking, after the goddess of dawn, because that's what she'll be, the dawn after your long night, the one who wakes you when it's time. She leaned down and pressed a kiss to the baby's forehead, and Aurelia felt the echo of it across 23 years, felt her mother's love fierce and desperate and willing to sacrifice everything to keep her daughter alive. I'm sorry I can't stay with you, Alara whispered. I'm sorry you'll grow up thinking you're nothing, but it's the only way to keep you safe until you're strong enough to face them. The vision shifted forward, 5 years ago. Alara standing on the eastern cliff, her back to the valley facing Elder Corvine, and 2 other alphas Aurelia recognized from the council. You have no proof, Corvine said, his voice dangerous. You have suspicions and the paranoid delusions of an Omega widow. No one will believe you. I have ledgers, Alara said, her chin lifted in defiance. I have letters. I have testimony from 3 other Omegas who witnessed the land sales. I have enough to bring before the High Council, and you know it. The High Council won't listen to an Omega. They'll listen to evidence, and they'll investigate when that evidence comes from someone carrying First Luna bloodline. Alara reached up and pulled her hair aside, revealing the crescent mark behind her ear. You thought you'd eliminated the bloodline generations ago, but we survived. We hid, and my daughter carries the mark too. Corvin's face went white. Where is she? Somewhere you'll never find her. Somewhere she'll be safe until the time comes. Alara smiled, and it was terrible. You can kill me. I've made my peace with that, but you can't stop what's coming. The first alpha will wake. My daughter will find him, and everything you've built on lies and stolen land will crumble. Then we'll make sure she never gets the chance. Corvine moved fast, his hand slamming into Alara's chest, and she stumbled backward. Her foot slipped on the rain-slick stone. She felt her arms windmilling, and Aurelia wanted to scream, wanted to reach through the vision and pull her mother back from the edge. But she could only watch as Alara plummeted over the cliff, her body tumbling through space, her scream cut short when she hit the rocks below. Corvine looked over the edge, his expression cold. An accident, a tragic slip on a rainy night. The 2 other alphas nodded, already composing the story they'd tell. And Aurelia understood everything. The vision shifted one final time. She saw herself 3 months ago walking past the treasury wing after finishing her work in the laundry. Saw Vivian Ashford slip out of a side door, something small and glowing, clutched in her hand. The moonstone pendant. Saw Vivian meet Elder Corvine in a shadowed corridor, saw her hand the pendant to him. It's done, Corvine asked. It's done. I made sure my scent was all over the room and hers wasn't. When you accuse her tomorrow, there will be no evidence to contradict it. Good. The sooner we eliminate the Morgan girl, the better. I won't make the same mistake twice. Her mother should have died 20 years ago. This time we'll finish what we started. Why not just banish her, why the Ancient? Because banishment means she might return. The Ancient ensures she disappears completely. No body to investigate. No questions to answer. Just another Omega who couldn't survive the old punishment. Corvine's smile was cruel. And if by some chance the Ancient recognizes her bloodline, then he'll wake. And we have preparations in place for that too. The iron meteorite explosives, hidden in 3 locations throughout the cavern system. When we seal the mountain entrance, we'll trigger them simultaneously. The Ancient will be buried under 1,000 tons of rock, and the first Luna bloodline will be eliminated forever. Aurelia's hand jerked out of the water. She was gasping, her heart-racing, tears streaming down her face. The crystal chamber swam back into focus around her, and Darius's hands were on her shoulders, steadying her. "Breathe," he said, his voice calm despite the intensity in his eyes. "You're back. You're safe. Breathe." "They killed her!" The words came out broken, ragged. "Corvin pushed her off the cliff. I saw it. I saw him murder my mother because she tried to expose their corruption." "I know." Darius pulled her against his chest, and she let herself collapse into him, let herself sob against his leather tunic while he held her. "I'm sorry you had to see it, but now you know the truth. They're planning to blow up the mountain. They have explosives." "Iron meteorite," Corvine said. "They want to bury you, bury the evidence of what they've done, bury everything." "Iron meteorite can harm me," Darius confirmed, his voice grim. "It's one of the few things that can. But they'll have to trigger it first, and we won't give them that chance." Aurelia pulled back, wiping at her eyes with shaking hands. "How long before they realize you're awake, before they realize the bond completed and I'm still alive?" "They already know. They felt it when the bond snapped into place. Every wolf in Thornridge would have felt it." Darius's expression was hard. "They're probably scrambling right now, trying to figure out what to do, whether to seal the mountain immediately or wait to see if we emerge. Then we need to move. We need to get out of here before they trap us." "No," Darius's hand cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "We need you to be ready, to understand what you are and what you can do. Because when we walk out of this mountain, Aurelia, we're not running. We're not hiding. We're going to face them, and you need to be strong enough to stand beside me when we do." "I don't know if I can be. I'm just your first Luna bloodline. You're my equal, and you're stronger than you know." He stood, pulling her up with him. "The vision showed you the past. Now I'm going to show you the present. Show you how to use the power that's been sleeping inside you for 23 years. He led her back to the pool's edge and knelt, gesturing for her to do the same. "The bloodline power is about connection," he said. "Every wolf in Thornridge is connected to you through the ancient bond, whether they know it or not, whether they want to be or not. You can feel them if you reach out. Feel their hearts, their intentions, their truth." "How?" "Close your eyes. Focus on the bond between us first. Feel how it connects us." Aurelia closed her eyes and reached inward toward the humming warmth in her chest. The bond was there, silver and strong, pulsing in rhythm with both their heartbeats. She could feel Darius through it, his strength, his determination, his grief still raw after 1,000 years, and beneath that something new, something that felt like hope. "Good," Darius said softly. "Now reach farther, beyond me, up through the mountain toward the pack above. Don't force it. Just let yourself expand like you're breathing out instead of in." Aurelia did as he said, letting her awareness spread like ripples on water. Up through the stone, through the cavern systems, through the tunnels and chambers and fissures in the rock. And suddenly she could feel them. Wolves, hundreds of them, each one a distinct presence, a heartbeat, a soul. She felt the young wolves in the training grounds, their hearts racing with the joy of physical exertion. Felt the mothers in the nursery, their love for their children so fierce it made her chest ache. Felt the warriors on the borders alert and watchful, and the elders in their quarters, their hearts slow and tired. And she felt the council. 6 alphas gathered in a private chamber, their hearts hammering with fear and fury and desperate calculation. "We seal the mountain tonight." Corvine's voice came through the bond, distant but clear. "We can't risk waiting. If the Ancient has truly awakened, if he's bonded with the Morgan girl, they'll come for us. We need to act now. The explosives are in place. Yes, 3 charges of iron meteorite positioned at key support points in the cavern system. When we trigger them, the entire eastern section of the mountain will collapse. It'll look like a natural cave-in, tragic but unavoidable. And if they survive the collapse, they won't. Nothing survives under that much rock, not even the first alpha." Aurelia's eyes snapped open. "They're going to do it tonight. Seal the mountain and trigger the explosives. Then we have less time than I thought." Darius stood, his expression set. "Can you hold on to that connection? Can you feel where the explosives are placed?" Aurelia reached out again, letting her awareness spread through the mountain. She could feel the iron meteorite now cold and wrong, like wounds in the stone. 3 of them, just as Corvine had said, one near the main entrance. "Trigger all 3 at once. We'll be trigger all 3 at once. We'll be buried alive, I know." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not fear, but fierce pride. "But you're going to stop them. You're going to use the bloodline power to reach those wolves who planted the explosives, and you're going to command them to remove the charges." "I can't. I don't know how to command anyone. I'm an Omega. No one listens to me." "You're not an Omega anymore. You're first Luna." Darius took her hand, pressed it against his chest, where his heart beat strong and steady. "And every wolf in that pack is bound to you, whether they acknowledge it or not. The bloodline power gives you authority that supersedes their alpha's commands. But you have to believe it, have to feel it in your bones. Aurelia looked down at her hand pressed against his chest, felt the bond between them pulsing with power, felt the connection spreading outward from her to every wolf in Thornridge, gossamer threads of ancient magic that had been waiting her whole life to be used. She thought about her mother standing on that cliff, defiant to the end, thought about 5 years of scrubbing floors and swallowing her voice and letting them treat her like she was nothing. She thought about the little girl in the vision, asking if she was strong enough, and the first Luna's answer, strength isn't just physical. Sometimes it's knowing how to heal instead of harm, how to build instead of destroy. Aurelia had spent her whole life learning to heal, learning to survive, learning to see what others missed. Maybe that was strength too. She closed her eyes and reached out through the bond, found the wolves who'd planted the explosives. 3 of them mercenaries hired from outside the pack, their hearts cold and calculating, waiting for Corvine's signal. And she spoke, not with her voice, but with the authority of 1,000 years of bloodline power, with the weight of every Luna who'd come before her. Remove the explosives. Now. She felt their resistance, felt them try to ignore the command. But the bloodline power was older than their will, older than their loyalty to Corvine, older than anything except the moon herself. Their hands moved without their permission. They lifted the iron meteorite charges, carried them away from the support points, placed them in chambers far from anywhere structural. When it was done, when all 3 explosives had been moved, Aurelia opened her eyes and met Darius's gaze. It's done, she said, and her voice didn't shake. They can't bury us now. Darius smiled, fierce and proud. Then it's time. Time to go back up there and face them. Time to show Elder Corvine and his corrupt council exactly what they failed to destroy. He offered her his hand and Aurelia took it. Together they turned toward the tunnels that would lead them back to the surface, back to the pack that had tried to kill them both, back to the reckoning that had been building for 23 years. Aurelia Morgan, the Omega who scrubbed floors, was gone. In her place stood First Luna, and she was done hiding. The tunnels trembled as they ascended. Not from explosives, those had been moved, rendered harmless by Aurelia's bloodline command. This trembling came from something else. From the mountain itself responding to the presence of its ancient king, returning to the surface after 1,000 years of exile. The stone seemed to shift and settle with each step they took, as though the rock remembered Darius and was making way for him. Aurelia felt it through the bond, the mountain's recognition. The earth beneath their feet was not just stone, but living memory, saturated with centuries of alpha power, of Luna wisdom of wolves who had walked these passages when the world was younger. They'll know we're coming, she said, her hand tight in Darius's. They'll feel you approaching. Good. His voice was granite and ice. I want them to feel it. Want them to have time to understand exactly what's about to happen. They'd been walking for over an hour, time strange in the darkness of the deep tunnels. Darius had recovered more of his strength with each passing minute, the worst of the weakness burned away by purpose and rage. He moved with fluid power now, no trace of the fever that had nearly killed him. The air grew less stale as they climbed. Aurelia could smell the surface now, pine and snow and wood smoke filtering down through cracks in the stone. They were close. Close enough that she could feel the pack above them, hundreds of heartbeats, hundreds of souls connected to her through threads they didn't know existed. And she could feel the council. 6 alphas gathered in the great hall where they'd condemned her. Their hearts were hammering, now fear and fury mixing into something toxic. They knew that Darius was awake, that the bond had completed, that their plan had failed. Seal it now. Corvine's voice came through the bond, sharp with panic. I don't care if the charges aren't in position. Seal the entrance and collapse what we can. We have to contain them. But it was too late for that. The tunnel mouth appeared ahead, a circle of gray daylight that looked impossibly bright after days in the dark. Darius didn't slow. He walked straight toward it, and Aurelia matched him step for step, her bare feet silent on stone, worn smooth by 1,000 years of footsteps. They emerged into a small antechamber, a space carved from the mountain's flank, where ancient guards had once stood watch. The main entrance to the tunnels lay beyond a massive iron gate that would have taken 10 wolves to move. The gate was closed, barred from the outside, and Aurelia could feel wolves on the other side, 24 at least, armed and waiting. Darius looked at the gate and smiled. It was not a kind expression. Step back, he said to Aurelia. She moved behind him and he placed both palms flat against the iron. For a moment, nothing happened. Then light began to seep from beneath his hands, the color of his eyes. The metal groaned, bent. The bars designed to keep threats out, to seal the mountain against invasion, twisted like soft clay under his touch. With a sound like a thunderclap, the gate exploded outward. Iron shrapnel flew through the air, and the wolves on the other side scattered some too slow crying out as metal fragments caught them. Darius stepped through the smoking ruin of the gate, and his presence hit the assembled wolves like a physical force. They dropped to their knees. All of them. Not from choice, but from the crushing weight of alpha dominance, the kind of power that didn't ask for submission, but demanded it on a level that bypassed conscious thought entirely. The first alpha, someone whispered, the words carried on shocked breath through the crowd that had gathered beyond the guards. Moon above, it's really him. Aurelia stepped through the ruined gate behind Darius, and every eye turned to her. She was still wearing the torn shift, still barefoot and filthy from days in the caves, her hair wild and tangled. She looked nothing like a Luna, nothing like a queen. But the crescent mark behind her ear was visible now, no longer hidden beneath carefully arranged hair. And it was glowing soft silver light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat, unmistakable and undeniable. First Luna bloodline, another voice breathed. The Morgan girl carries first Luna bloodline. The crowd parted as Darius walked forward, Aurelia at his side. Not behind him, beside him, equal. The packed territory spread before them, familiar and strange at once. The great hall rose in the distance, its stone walls dark against the late afternoon sky. Between here and there, wolves lined the path, kneeling, their heads bowed, their wolves forced into submission by a power older than their pack, older than their hierarchy, older than anything they'd been taught to understand. Aurelia scanned the faces as they passed, saw the Omega girls she'd worked with in the kitchens, their eyes wide with shock and something that might have been hope. Saw the warriors who'd never looked at her twice now trembling under the weight of Darius's dominance. Saw the families, the children, the elders. And there near the Great Hall's entrance, she saw the council. 6 alphas standing in a line because they were too proud to kneel, even when their wolves screamed at them to submit. Elder Corvine in the center, his face like carved stone, his hands clenched at his sides. To his right, Vivian Ashford, her golden hair disheveled, her silk stained with sweat. Darius stopped 20 feet from them, the space between filled with kneeling wolves, witnesses to what was about to happen. Elder Thaddeus Corvine, Darius's voice carried across the assembled pack, resonant and terrible. You sent my mate to die. You are a relic? Corvine's voice shook, but he forced it steady. A monster from a time long past. You have no authority here anymore. I am Darius. I am the first alpha, the one your ancestors swore a blood oath to serve. Darius took a step forward, and Corvine flinched despite himself. And you chained my queen to stone and left her in the dark to be devoured. She's not a queen, she's an Omega, a thief who stole from the pack. Liar. The word cracked like lightning, and 3 of the council alphas collapsed to their knees, their wolves finally overriding their pride. Only Corvine and 2 others remained standing, shaking with the effort of resisting. Aurelia felt the moment like a string being pulled taut. Felt the attention of the entire pack shift to her, waiting to see what she would do. She stepped forward, drawing every eye. I didn't steal the Moonstone pendant, she said, her voice clear and steady. Vivian Ashford did. Vivian's face went white. That's a lie. I can prove it. Aurelia looked at the crowd, at the hundreds of wolves watching. The bloodline power gives me sight, the ability to see truth through lies, to witness memory through the bond that connects us all. She turned back to Vivian. Should I show them what I saw? Show them you meeting Elder Corvine in the shadowed corridor, handing him the pendant you stole? You have no proof, Corvine spat. You have visions and delusions, and I have the bond. Aurelia raised her hand, and the crescent mark behind her ear flared brighter. Every wolf here is connected to me, and if I open that connection, if I share what I saw, they'll feel it as truth, undeniable and absolute. She could do it, could feel the power thrumming under her skin, waiting to be released. But she hesitated, because that kind of violation felt wrong, felt like something Corvine would do, not something a Luna should. Darius sensed her hesitation and stepped beside her. You don't have to prove anything to them, Aurelia. Not if it costs you something you're not willing to pay. Then we'll do it the old way. Darius turned to face the council. I invoke the right of testimony, a formal hearing before witnesses where evidence is presented and truth is determined not by force but by fact. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The right of testimony was ancient law, older than Thornridge, older than the pack system itself. We have no neutral authority, Corvine said. The council presides over all pack matters. The council is accused, Darius countered, which means we need authority from outside Thornridge, from the High Council itself. The High Council, the governing body that oversaw all packs in the Rocky Mountain territories. 3 Justicars who traveled between packs, adjudicating disputes, enforcing ancient laws. The High Council hasn't visited Thornridge in 40 years, one of the other Council Alphas said. They won't come for an Omega's accusations. They'll come for the first Alpha's summons. Darius's eyes glowed in the fading light, and for the testimony of First Luna bloodline. They'll come because the law requires it. Corvine's jaw worked, and Aurelia could feel his mind racing through the bond, searching for a way out. But there wasn't one. To refuse would be to admit guilt. Fine, Corvine said through gritted teeth. Send for the High Council. Let them come and hear your accusations. Oh, they'll judge, Aurelia said softly. They'll judge everything. Your corruption, your murders, your theft of pack lands, all of it. Vivian made a sound like a strangled sob and bolted. She shifted mid-run, her clothes tearing, as golden fur erupted across her skin, and her wolf form was sleek and fast-built for escape. She made it 3 strides before Aurelia moved. She didn't plan it, didn't think, just reached out through the bond and spoke with bloodline authority. Stop. Vivienne's wolf froze mid-stride, her body going rigid. She shifted back to human, involuntarily collapsing naked on the ground, and her scream of frustration echoed across the territory. You can't run, Aurelia said, walking toward her. The bond connects us, and I can feel you wherever you go. So you're going to stay. You're going to face what you've done, and you're going to tell the truth. She extended her hand and touched Vivienne's temple. Images flashed through the connection. Corvine giving orders. Vivienne stealing the pendant. The conspiracy. And beneath it all, a deeper truth. He's your father, Aurelia said loud enough for everyone to hear. Corvine is your father, illegitimate, hidden, and he promised you legitimacy if you helped him eliminate me. Vivienne's face crumpled. I didn't want to. He said you were dangerous. I thought I was protecting the pack. You thought you were protecting your chance at being recognized. Aurelia's voice was not unkind, just tired. But you chose wrong, Vivienne, and now you get to live with that choice. She pulled her hand back and turned to Darius. How long until the High Council can arrive? I'll send ravens tonight. They'll be here within the week. His expression was grim, which means we have 7 days to gather evidence. 7 days to prepare testimony. 7 days, Aurelia repeated. She looked at the assembled pack. Then we have work to do. Darius released his hold and the pack rose shakily to their feet. You're all witnesses now, Darius told them. Anyone who saw something, who knows something, who has evidence of corruption or theft or murder, come forward. Your testimony will be heard. No one moved at first. The fear was too ingrained, the habit of silence too strong. Then a small voice spoke from the crowd. I saw something. Everyone turned. It was one of the kitchen Omegas, a girl barely 16 named Clara. She was shaking, but she stepped forward anyway. I saw Elder Corvine meeting with men from the Human Lumber Company 2 years ago. They gave him a bag, and I heard them talking about acres of land, about cutting rights and payments. Thank you, Clara. Aurelia's throat was tight. Your testimony will be recorded. Another voice, an older wolf, a former beta. I kept the books for the council 10 years back, saw discrepancies in the accounts. When I brought it to Elder Corvine, he threatened my family if I spoke of it. Another, and another. Like a dam breaking, wolves began to step forward. Omegas who'd seen things, betas who'd been silenced, warriors who'd been ordered to look away. Corvine watched it happen with murder in his eyes. 7 days, Darius said again. Gather your evidence, Corvine. Prepare your defense. He turned and walked toward the Great Hall, and Aurelia followed. 7 days passed like a held breath. Wolves came forward with evidence. Ledgers that showed discrepancies. Letters from the lumber company discussing 400 acres of sacred land sold over 15 years. Testimonies from Omegas and Betas who'd witnessed things they'd been too afraid to report. Slowly, piece by piece, the full scope of Corvine's corruption emerged. 2.3 million in illegal profit. 3 Omegas murdered for discovering the truth. Years of systematic theft disguised as legitimate pack business. Aurelia spent those 7 days learning. Learning from Darius how to use bloodline power without violating boundaries. Learning how to distinguish truth from lies in testimony. Learning how to lead without dominating. And on the 7th day, as dawn broke over the Rocky Mountains, 3 riders appeared on the eastern ridge. The High Council Justicars had arrived. By mid-morning, the Great Hall was packed. Every wolf in Thornridge who could fit had crowded inside, with more gathered outside the doors. The air was thick with tension and the scent of too many bodies pressed together. At the front of the hall, 3 chairs had been placed on the raised platform. Austere, imposing, and in those chairs sat the Justicars. Justicar Aldrich Ironwood sat in the center, 70 years old with silver hair and eyes like flint. Lead adjudicator. His face was weathered and hard-carved by decades of judging disputes across a dozen territories. To his left sat Justicar Morgana Silverstream, 65, with steel-gray hair bound in a severe braid. Evidence master, her sharp eyes missed nothing, scanning the assembled crowd with the precision of a hawk. To his right sat Justicar Cornelius Ashwood, 68, broad-shouldered, despite his age. Sentencing authority. His presence alone carried the weight of final judgment. Aurelia stood to the side with Darius, both of them dressed now in simple but clean clothing. She'd bathed for the first time in a week, her hair braided back to reveal the glowing crescent mark. Darius wore leather and fur, looking every inch the ancient alpha he was. Across from them, separated by 20 feet of open floor, stood Elder Corvine and the 5 other council alphas. Vivienne stood slightly apart, her head bowed. This hearing is convened. Aldrich's voice rang out, silencing the murmurs. We are here to examine accusations of corruption, land theft, and murders against the Thornridge Council. These are serious charges that require serious evidence. He turned to Darius. First Alpha, you invoke the right of testimony. The floor is yours. Darius stepped forward, and his voice carried to every corner of the hall. 43 years ago, the Thornridge Council began selling sacred pack lands to a human lumber company, 400 acres over 15 years. 2.3 million in profit hidden in accounts outside pack territory. When wolves discovered this theft, they were silenced. 3 Omegas were murdered, their deaths disguised as accidents. These are bold claims, Morgana said, her eyes sharp. What evidence supports them? I have ledgers, Aurelia said, stepping forward. Letters, witness testimony, and something more. I have the bloodline power to see truth through memory. Visions are not evidence, Corvine interrupted. They're the delusions of a girl who's been feral in the caves for a week. Then we'll start with physical evidence, Darius said calmly. For the next hour, evidence was presented. Claire came forward with her testimony about the lumber company meeting. The former beta accountant brought forward copies of ledgers he'd secretly kept showing discrepancies between official records and actual accounts. Letters were read aloud, correspondence between Corvine and lumber company executives discussing payment schedules and harvest rights. A map was displayed showing the 400 acres marked as sold to external interests in records that Corvine had thought were destroyed. Morgana examined each piece with meticulous care, asking sharp questions, verifying dates and signatures. Then came the witness testimonies. Gannon stepped forward, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. Elder Corvine ordered me to chain Aurelia Morgan to the altar. He said she'd stolen the pendant, but when I collected her from the kitchens, her hands were covered in soap. She'd been working just like she said. I checked the logs later. Her schedule matched her testimony exactly. She was in the laundry until midnight. Why didn't you speak up at the tribunal? Aldrich asked. Because I was afraid. Gannon's voice was thick with shame. Corvine has ruined wolves for less than questioning his authority. I have a mate, 2 children. I was a coward. But you're speaking now, Aurelia said quietly. That matters. 4 more wolves testified to seeing suspicious activities, meetings with humans, unexplained wealth, threats against those who ask questions. Then Vivian was called forward. She walked to the center of the hall on trembling legs, her face pale. She looked at Corvine, then at Aurelia, then at the Justicars. Tell us what you know, Morgana said. I stole the Moonstone pendant, Vivian said, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 months ago, Elder Corvine told me to take it and make sure my scent was all over the treasury, and that Aurelia's wasn't. He said when he accused her the next day, there would be no evidence to contradict it. Why did you agree to this? Aldrich asked. Because he's my father. The words came out broken. Illegitimate. Hidden. He promised me legitimacy, promised me recognition if I helped him eliminate the Morgan girl before she could awaken. Before she could awaken. Cornelius leaned forward. Explain. He said she carried First Luna bloodline, that if she ever shifted, if she ever found the ancient, everything he'd built would be exposed. He was right. Vivian looked at Aurelia. I'm sorry, I thought I was protecting the pack. But I was just protecting my chance at being something more than his secret shame. A heavy silence fell over the hall. Do you have evidence of this relationship? Morgana asked. Vivienne produced a letter from her pocket written in Corvine's hand discussing our arrangement and your position in the pack once the bloodline is eliminated. Morgana examined it, then nodded. This is Corvine's handwriting. We verified it against official documents. Corvine's face had gone white, then red. This is a conspiracy, a witch hunt orchestrated by a girl who spent too long in the dark and an ancient who should have stayed sleeping. Then explain the ledgers, Darius said coldly. Explain the letters from the lumber company. Explain why 400 acres of sacred land were sold without pack approval. I did what was necessary to keep this pack strong, to keep us fed and protected in a changing world. You did what was profitable, Aurelia said. And when my mother discovered it, when she tried to bring evidence to the High Council 5 years ago, you killed her. The hall erupted in gasps and murmurs. That's a lie, Corvine snarled. Alara Morgan fell from a cliff, an accident. It was murder, Aurelia's voice cut through the noise. And I can prove it, not with visions, but with witnesses. She turned to the crowd. There were 2 other alphas with Corvine on that cliff 5 years ago. I saw them in the bloodline memory, and I can feel them now in this hall, their hearts hammering with guilt. She let her awareness spread through the bond, touching each wolf until she found them. 2 older alphas standing near the back, their faces draining of color as they felt her attention focus on them. Come forward, she said. It was not a request. They came, their wolves compelled by bloodline authority. They stood before the Justicars shaking. Tell them what happened on the eastern cliff, Aurelia said. Tell them the truth. The first alpha, a grizzled wolf named Marcus, swallowed hard. Alara Morgan confronted us, said she had evidence of the land sales, said she was bringing it to the High Council. Corvine. He pushed her. She fell. We helped him cover it up. We were afraid, the second alpha, Thomas added quickly. Corvine said if we didn't support his story, our families would suffer. We've lived with the guilt for 5 years. Aldrich's expression was like stone. You witnessed a murder and said nothing. We were cowards, Marcus said, just like Gannon, just like everyone who stayed silent. We're guilty too. Corvine stood frozen, his world crumbling around him. Is there anything else? Morgana asked, looking at Aurelia. One more thing. Aurelia turned to face the crowd. Corvine planted iron meteorite explosives in the mountain. 3 charges positioned to collapse the caverns and bury both Darius and all evidence of his crimes. He was willing to destroy the sacred mountain itself to hide his corruption. The explosives were moved, Darius added, by mercenaries Corvine hired from outside the pack. We can produce them as witnesses. That won't be necessary, Aldrich said, his voice heavy. He looked at Corvine. We've heard enough. Elder Thaddeus Corvine, you stand accused of corruption, land theft, conspiracy, and murder. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Corvine's mouth opened and closed. His shoulders sagged. The fight went out of him all at once, and he looked suddenly old, ancient, defeated. I did what I thought was necessary, he said quietly. For 40 years I led this pack, kept them fed, kept them safe, and this is how it ends. You led through theft and murder, Aldrich said. That is not leadership. That is tyranny. He conferred briefly with Morgana and Cornelius, their voices too low to hear. Then he stood. We have reached a verdict. The hall went silent. Elder Thaddeus Corvine, you are guilty of all charges. The evidence is overwhelming and corroborated by multiple witnesses. For the crime of murdering a pack member, the sentence is death. Corvine swayed on his feet. However, Aldrich continued, in consideration of your age and the traditions of mercy, we will commute the sentence to immediate exile beyond the Rocky Mountains. You will be stripped of all titles, all property, all pack affiliation. If you are found within these territories after sunset today, the original sentence will be carried out. Do you understand? I understand, Corvine whispered. For the 5 council alphas who participated in the corruption, you are sentenced to permanent exile. Your property is forfeit. You will leave Thornridge before sunset. He turned to Marcus and Thomas. For your role in covering up murder, you are sentenced to 5 years hard labor in service to the pack, followed by permanent loss of rank. You will serve as Omegas, that you might learn what it means to be powerless. Both wolves nodded, tears streaming down their faces. For Vivian Ashford, in consideration of your cooperation and remorse, you are sentenced to 3 years service to the Omega community. You will work in the kitchens and laundries under the supervision of those you sought to harm. Vivian collapsed to her knees. Thank you. Thank you. Aldrich turned to the assembled pack. The High Council imposes the following reforms on Thornridge Omega representation on the new council, minimum 2 seats with full voting power. Financial audits every 6 months by external authority. Sacred lands cannot be sold under any circumstances codified into pack law. And fair trial protocols, Omega defendants receive advocates and the right to present evidence. He looked at Darius and Aurelia. The High Council recognizes Darius as first alpha with all attendant authority, and we recognize Aurelia Morgan as first Luna bearer of the ancient bloodline. Together you will lead Thornridge into a new era. The hall erupted in howls, not of protest, but of recognition, of celebration, of wolves witnessing justice served after decades of corruption. Cornelius stood and drew a silver blade. The sentence will be carried out immediately. Corvine was led outside. The pack followed, forming a circle around him. Aurelia expected to feel satisfaction, vindication, even joy. Instead, she felt only a bone-deep weariness. Wait, she said. Everyone stopped. She walked to where Corvine stood, this old man who had killed her mother, who had tried to kill her, who had corrupted an entire pack for 40 years. You don't deserve mercy, she said quietly so only he could hear. But my mother taught me that strength isn't just about destroying enemies. It's about building something better. So I'm going to give you what you never gave her. A choice from Admirabums. She turned to Cornelius. Commute the exile to life imprisonment. Let him live out his days in a cell where he can think about everything he's done. Death is too easy, too quick. Cornelius looked at Aldrich, who nodded slowly. It will be done, Cornelius said. Corvine will be imprisoned in High Council custody. He will never be free again. Corvine looked at Aurelia with something that might have been gratitude or might have been despair. Thank you, he whispered. I don't deserve it. No, Aurelia agreed. You don't. But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because my mother wouldn't want me to become what you are. She turned away and walked back to Darius, who pulled her close. That was mercy, he said. That was justice, she corrected. Real justice, not revenge. 3 days after the trial, the pack gathered again in the Great Hall. But this time it was for celebration, not judgment. The space had been transformed. Evergreen boughs hung from the rafters, their scent mixing with wood smoke and honeymead. Torches burned in every sconce, casting warm light across stone walls that had witnessed so much darkness. And at the center of it all, a raised platform had been built, decorated with white flowers that bloomed only in the mountain's highest meadows. Aurelia stood in a small chamber off the hall, looking at herself in a polished silver mirror. She wore a dress of white doe skin, simple but beautiful, embroidered with silver thread and patterns that echoed the crescent mark behind her ear. Her hair had been washed and braided with small white flowers. Her feet were bare. A Luna walked the earth, directly connected to the pack and the land. Clara and 3 other Omega girls fussed around her, adjusting the dress, placing final flowers. You look beautiful, Clara whispered, her eyes shining. I look terrified, Aurelia said, but she smiled. That's normal. Every Luna feels that way before the bonding ceremony. The speaker was an elderly woman named Esther, who had been the pack's record keeper for 50 years. She stepped forward, holding a silver pendant. This was your mother's. She left it in my keeping, told me to give it to you when you came into your power. Aurelia took the pendant with shaking hands. It was simple as silver crescent moon on a delicate chain. Knew, Aurelia whispered. She knew all knew, Aurelia whispered. She knew all along. She loved you more than life, Esther said. She sacrificed everything so you could have this moment. Wear it with pride. Aurelia fastened the pendant around her neck, feeling the weight of it settle against her heart. Feeling her mother's love, her sacrifice, her hope for a daughter who would break the chains and stand in the light. A knock on the door. Darius's voice. It's time. Aurelia took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked out. The great hall fell silent as she entered. 300 wolves, maybe more, all turned to watch her walk down the center aisle. The Omegas who had worked beside her in the kitchens. The warriors who had ignored her for years. The families who had looked through her like she was invisible. Now they saw her, really saw her, and they knelt, not from dominance, but from respect, from recognition, from joy. At the end of the aisle on the raised platform, Darius waited. He wore leather and fur, his hair bound back, the ancient pendant of the first alpha around his neck. When he saw her, his eyes softened, and a smile touched his lips. Aurelia climbed the steps and took her place beside him. Aldrich Ironwood stood between them, holding a silver bowl filled with spring water from the heart of the mountain. Behind him, Morgana and Cornelius witnessed representing the High Council's blessing. We gather under the moon's light. Aldrich began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, to witness the bonding of Alpha and Luna. This is not a claiming. This is not a possession. This is a partnership, a joining of equals who choose each other freely. He turned to Darius. Do you, Darius, first Alpha, take Aurelia as your mate, your equal, your partner in all things? I do. Darius's voice was steady, absolute. I bind my life to hers, my strength to her wisdom, my power to her grace. She is my equal, not my subject, my partner, not my possession. And I will stand beside her, not above her, for all the days the moon gives us. Aldrich turned to Aurelia. Do you, Aurelia, first Luna, take Darius as your mate, your equal, your partner in all things? Aurelia's throat was tight, but her voice didn't shake. I do. I bind my soul to his, my heart to his protection, my purpose to his reign. He is my equal, not my master, my partner, not my owner. And I will stand beside him, not behind him, for all the days the moon gives us. Aldrich dipped his fingers in the spring water and traced a crescent on Darius's forehead, then on Aurelia's. Where the water touched it glowed with soft silver light. By the authority vested in me by the High Council and by the ancient laws that govern all wolves, I recognize this bond. You are mated, you are partners, you are Alpha and Luna, equal in power and equal in purpose. Darius took Aurelia's hands. The bond between them, already strong, blazed brighter. She could feel his heartbeat, his joy, his fierce pride. Could feel the love that had grown over the past 10 days from gratitude to partnership to something deeper. I've waited 1,000 years for you, he said softly for her ears only. Not for First Luna bloodline, for you. Aurelia Morgan, the Omega who saved my life and taught me what strength really means. And I've waited my whole life to be seen, she replied. You saw me when no one else would. You made me believe I was worth something. You were always worth everything. He leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, tender, nothing like the desperate kiss of medicine and fever in the cavern. This was a promise, a beginning. The hall erupted in howls. 300 wolves celebrating not a conquest, but a partnership. Not a submission, but a choice freely made. When they pulled apart, Aurelia turned to face the pack, Darius's hand in hers. I know what many of you are thinking, she said, her voice carrying across the hall. How can an Omega be Luna? How can someone who couldn't shift, who scrubbed floors, who was labeled broken and defective, lead a pack? She paused, letting the question hang. But I'm not an Omega anymore. I'm not broken. I never was. I was hidden, protected, kept safe until the time was right. And now I stand here, first Luna bloodline mated to the first Alpha, ready to lead beside him. She looked at the Omega section where Clara and the other kitchen girls sat. To every Omega in this pack, I say this. You are not less than. You are not weak. You are not invisible. Your gifts matter. Your voices matter. You matter. And under my leadership, you will have representation, protection, and respect. She looked at the warriors, the betas, the families. To the rest of the pack, I say this. The old ways are over. Strength is not just physical power. It's wisdom, compassion, justice, and mercy. Together, we will build something better than what came before. A pack where every wolf has value, where truth matters more than power, where justice is real, not just for the strong. She raised her hand and the crescent mark behind her ear blazed with silver light. I am Aurelia Morgan, first Luna, and I am done hiding. The howls that answered her shook the rafters. The eastern meadow bloomed with late spring flowers, a riot of color against the gray stone of the mountain. Aurelia stood at the cliff edge, not the same cliff where her mother had died, but close. Close enough to remember, but far enough to heal. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of the pack. Children laughing, warriors training, the steady rhythm of daily life in a pack that was finding its balance again. Darius approached from behind his arms, sliding around her waist. She leaned back against his chest, feeling the bond hum between them warm and constant. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "My mother. How she'd be proud, I think. How she sacrificed everything for this moment." Aurelia touched the pendant at her throat. "And how I wish she could see it." "She can't," Darius said. "Through you. Through everything you've built." Aurelia thought about the changes of the past 6 months. The new council with Clara and another Omega named Ruth sitting as full voting members. The monthly financial audits that had uncovered and returned another $500,000 in stolen funds. The Omega school where Aurelia taught survival skills, herbs first aid reading, weather navigation. The memorial built on the 400 acres of returned sacred land, honoring the 3 Omegas Corvine had murdered, including Laura Morgan. The trials had been hard, rebuilding trust harder still. But slowly the pack was healing. "Vivienne finished her first year of service yesterday," Aurelia said. "She came to me, asked if I'd forgiven her." "What did you tell her?" "That forgiveness isn't something you earn in a year. It's something you build over a lifetime. But I told her I see her trying. That matters." Darius was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're a better Luna than I dared hope for. Not because of your bloodline, because of who you are. I'm still learning. We both are. That's what partnership means." Aurelia turned in his arms, looking up at him. This ancient alpha who had waited 1,000 years, who had taught her to use her power without losing herself, who stood beside her instead of above her. "I love you," she said. Simple words, but they carried weight. Truth. "I love you," he replied. "My equal, my partner, my queen. And you are mine, my alpha, my mate, my choice." They stood there as the sun set over the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Two wolves who had been broken in different ways, who had found each other in darkness, who had chosen to build something better in the light. Below them, the pack began the evening howl. It started with the children, their young voices sweet and uncertain. Then the Omegas joined their howl, no longer subdued but strong. Then the warriors, the betas, the families. 300 voices rising together, not in submission or dominance, but in unity. Aurelia and Darius shifted together, their wolves emerging in perfect synchronization. White and black light and dark balanced. And they howled. Their voices joined the pack's, adding alpha authority and Luna wisdom to the chorus. The sound rose into the twilight sky, carrying across valleys and over ridges a declaration that Thornridge Pack was whole again. That justice had been served. That something new had been built on the foundations of something ancient. In a cell hundreds of miles away, in High Council custody, Corvine heard that howl, heard the joy in it, the unity, and knew that everything he'd built on lies had been replaced with something built on truth. In the kitchens, Clara heard that howl and smiled, remembering the Omega girl who used to scrub beside her and was now Luna. In the memorial garden where white flowers bloomed year-round through some magic of the bloodline, Ilara's name was carved in stone. And if you stood there on quiet nights, you could almost feel her presence, almost hear her whisper, "Well done, my daughter, well done." The howl faded and Aurelia and Darius shifted back to human form. The bond between them glowed softly in the gathering dark, visible to any who had eyes to see it. A silver thread that connected them heart to heart, soul to soul. "Ready to go home?" Darius asked. Aurelia looked back at the packed territory spread below. At the great hall where justice had been served. At the training grounds where Omegas now learned to fight alongside warriors. At the gardens where children of all ranks played together. At the future they were building together. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." Hand in hand they walked back down the mountain, not as master and servant, not as Alpha and Omega, but as partners, as equals, as mates who had chosen each other freely and would face whatever came next together. The moon rose over Thornridge full and bright, and under her light the pack that had been built on secrets and corruption began a new chapter. One written not in darkness, but in dawn. Aurelia Morgan, who had walked into the mountain in chains, condemned and forgotten, had walked out a queen. And the monster in the dark, he'd been waiting for her all along, not to devour her, to love her, to stand beside her, to help her build something worth believing in. And in the end, that was the greatest strength of all.